And then I proceeded to try and get financing for this. And really, honestly, I had a male banker actually say to me, "Oh, honey, no one's going to live downtown." And the "oh, honey" was like the thing that really got to me. So I have two female bankers to thank for my real estate portfolio. I think without that, I would not have been successful as a developer, which is pretty shocking thing to say, right? But it's true.
This is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. This is your host, Neil Collins. It is a show that is supported by our work at Latitude Realty. In it, we explore our natural and built environments and how they can be used as a force for good. The show sets out to inspire impactful ideas, meaningful change, human wellness, and ecological restoration through interviews and easy-to-digest conversations. Our guests range from industry leaders to iconoclasts, from both well-known figures to everyday people leading extraordinary lives. This is a show for people looking for education and inspiration on how real estate can be done differently. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Neil Collins, and I'm joined today with Eve Picker. Eve, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me here.
I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to our conversation for a little while. And before we get into your background of everything that you've been doing over your career, because I think that we've got a lot of nuggets to get into and why I'm really interested in having you on, which is really about how you've been pioneering crowdfunding of real estate projects that are seeking to be impactful and transformative. Let's start off with, you have a different accent. I'm curious where you grew up.
I grew up in Australia, and and I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So it was quite a journey. I came to the United States originally to actually do a master's in urban design at Columbia. I'm an architect by training, and I've always found myself to be very fascinated by cities. And the architectural training I had was much more focused on iconic buildings, not cities. And I wanted to know how to build better cities. So I took myself to New York to do an urban design program, and then unexpectedly found myself in Pittsburgh.
And what do you think it was that originally drew you towards the urban environment, particularly?
I don't know. I really don't know. I've always loved cities, and from as far back as I can remember, my dream was to live downtown above a coffee shop. So, in Pittsburgh, that wasn't really possible. So I just figured I had to make it happen myself. Um, when I came here, downtown was a pretty sad place. So I bit off a number of downtown projects and sort of jump started a new neighborhood that's pretty lively now. I don't really know what's drawn me to cities, but I've always loved buildings. I've always loved buildings. I've always loved architecture. I like public places. I just like the activity and the innovation and creativity in cities. That's always been of great interest to me. It's just in my DNA. What can I say?
I'm curious, whenever you went to architecture school, what were you thinking that career path was going to be like? Did you
I really
initially
didn't
go down the
know. I
route?
really didn't know. I thought I'd be an architect. You know, I think actually today I would always hire an architect before I hire anyone else, because as an architect, even if I'm not a traditional architect in what I do, I received a pretty extraordinary training. Architects are taught how to make something happen out of nothing, literally nothing. a lot. You know, how are you going to design it? How are you going to build it? How's it going to be occupied? What sort of space is it going to make around it? How's it going to fit into the city? All of this, they have to plan and design. It's a problem solving education, and a really deep and significant one. And that has that's paid itself back many times over for me in many unexpected ways. So while I didn't stick with architecture per se, because I for many reasons, one being that I always felt in that industry that women weren't taken as seriously, just as in every other industry in life. And I found myself in a firm working on toilet details and stair details, and thinking, it's going to take me 15 years to get into a position where I can make any decisions on my own and even have a little fun. It just wasn't for me. And then around the same time, I moved into a neighborhood in Pittsburgh that was really rather sad, and took on a house project there that was pretty exciting. Met a group of neighbors who wanted to help restore the neighborhood, created a nonprofit community development corporation, and started doing real estate development work first in the nonprofit as a volunteer, and then on my own. And I just fell in love with it. It gave me an opportunity to take all those skills that I'd learned as an architect, problem solving, taking a building that had a fire in it or a vacant lot, and really creating something meaningful for the neighborhood it sits in. All the way through architecture and design and financing and getting it occupied. Like, all of those steps were a challenge and interesting for me. It was a complete process. So that's where I landed.
Can you explain a little bit more why you ended up on the nonprofit route to begin with?
So what I discovered in Pittsburgh was a city that, do you know any of Pittsburgh's history?
I know a little bit about
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. It's had a Phoenix comeback story as
It
of recent.
has. It has. But it was the story before that that was really pretty sad. So Pittsburgh is a Rust Belt city, lost more than half its population in the 70s and 80s to both suburban flight and the loss of its industry, which was steel, which all went south, and found itself really having to rethink itself, and also empty. So there are complete neighborhoods in Pittsburgh to this day that have not been repopulated, because the population still stands at just over 300,000, whereas at one point it was almost 700,000. But you have to keep in mind that family size is different now. So it doesn't mean that 50% of Pittsburgh is empty. It's just populated differently. For a while, we were only the second oldest county in the country, only to Dade County, which was the oldest, because when industry left, everyone who could get a job out of the city left as well, and so the people who were left behind were those who really couldn't leave, and that population has aged, and and I think it also makes for the racial disparities in Pittsburgh, which is, it's not like Atlanta or Detroit, where you feel like everyone is more integrated. Here, I think there is a real disparity between white and black often means poor. It's all part of that history of Pittsburgh, which it has to overcome. So when I arrived in Pittsburgh, I looked for a house to live in, and found one in a very charming neighborhood full of beautiful Victorian houses that were looking pretty sorry for themselves and were very cheap. Okay. And being naive and not really digging into what was happening around there, we went ahead and bought one and moved in, and found ourselves in a neighborhood that was kind of part of that transformation. It was really struggling, but there was a steady stream of people moving in just like us. It became known as the gay neighborhood in Pittsburgh, had a ton of architects living in it, and professors and people who couldn't really afford a really hot neighborhood but saw the possibility here. And we banded together and created this nonprofit community development corporation, which is pretty standard in Pittsburgh. There are tons of nonprofits doing this sort of work, and started to think through how to deal with some of the problem properties in that neighborhood to make it a better place for everyone. And I became involved really early on in forming that entity. This is not something I ever grew up with, so it was all new and very interesting to me. And then I volunteered to do the first real estate project because we did not have staff. And I sort of just fell in love with the process. It was amazing to take a building that everyone had given up on and were willing really literally to tear it down and use it as a parking lot, to take it and transform it into something useful and saleable and something that someone else would enjoy was just a, a, a really wonderful process. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. So that for me was the beginning of my um, real experience with real estate. As an architect, I felt like I was an outsider, drawing drawings for developers who really made things happen. And this nonprofit and this experience in this neighborhood gave me the opportunity to be an insider actually making things happen.
And was it a nonprofit because it was easier to raise funds that way?
Oh yeah, no, if you're in a soft market like Pittsburgh is, you can't build at market rate. You can't. It costs more to build than you're ever going to be able to get back. The sales prices in those neighborhoods are low, rent is low, and somehow you have to produce something that will be occupied and eventually will have more value. So those underserved, depopulated neighborhoods are typically served with funds from urban redevelopment authorities who step in and fill that gap. And that's why you need a nonprofit. You get grants and lower than market rate interest loans to work in neighborhoods that really need help.
So where did you go from there? I mean, I know that
Oh,
doing that can induce a bit of brain trauma to marry in public and private. Is that really
Oh, I
the
loved it. I
route that
loved
you?
it. So that was really, what I ended up doing was marrying public and private in my own life because I went on to start a small development company and started tackling projects, for-profit projects that were on the verge of being nonprofit. And I'd learned a lot. I'd learned a lot about the way the Urban Redevelopment Authority thinks and how they want to deploy their funds to make the city better. I also took a job as an urban designer with the planning department. So I had this, I think, incredible experience of understanding how the city thought about it should make itself better, being an architect, understanding design, and starting to pick away at real estate development. And so I started doing projects which, I don't know, maybe it's Australian in me. I never thought they were that wild, but I tended towards, how can I say this? Developer is a very big word. People come to that career from many, many different backgrounds. Sometimes they're lawyers, sometimes they train as developers, sometimes they come from business school, but it means a lot of different things to different people. Everything from fix and flip to a 3,000 unit project, okay? And for me, I decided, and I thought about this a lot, that I'm not really driven by a deal. I'm really driven by making cities better. I really like the process of a building adding to the life of a city or neighborhood. And so those are the projects I focused on. And because I learned a lot from the nonprofit, I was able to establish the city and the Urban Redevelopment Authority as my partners in these little projects, which all needed a whole wide array of financing to get them to work. So I started small on a couple of buildings in the neighborhood I was in, and then I purchased a vacant 8-story building in downtown Pittsburgh that was not huge, but I decided I was going to convert it into lofts, which really caused quite a stir in Pittsburgh. It wasn't rocket science, it was just 8 units. It was not, but it was a fabulous building in a really interesting location. And then I proceeded to try and get financing for this. And really, honestly, I had a mail banker actually say to me, "Oh, honey, no one's going to live downtown." And the "oh, honey" was like the thing that really got to me. So I have two female bankers to thank for my real estate portfolio. I think without that, I would not have been successful as a developer, which is pretty shocking thing to say, right? But it's true. And eventually, I converted those 8 floors into condominiums because it was the only financing I could get from one of these female bankers. I could not get financing that would make it a rental project, and that was okay. And I went on to do, I don't know, maybe 6 other projects downtown before the big guys stampeded over me from behind. And it was a ton of fun, and I felt like I was not only doing something what I was doing something worthwhile, really sort of changing the nature of a place by thinking about how to contribute to it in a meaningful way, not just tearing things down, but building little interstitial projects that really kind of add to place. So certainly some developers would say, well, that's not the way to make a lot of money, and I agree with them, but it's certainly a great way to lead your life. That and you know how much money does anyone really need, right? So
Well,
that's
yeah.
me as a developer.
Whenever the algorithm is how do we deliver more units versus how do we invest and transform a community,
Right.
I'm curious what is the way that you do that? Like how do you find that you listen to the community's needs in terms of what
Oh,
improve it?
I have to tell you honestly, I wasn't very good at that. I'm an introvert by nature, and I found the whole community engagement thing to be just extraordinarily difficult. I think I probably do it better today than I did it 10 years ago, but it's not my strong point. I know it's really important, and I want to listen, but I think there's also so much mistrust in Pittsburgh. I'm a white woman, and anyone who's black is going to mistrust me, and that's really difficult hurdle to overcome. And I'll tell you honestly, one of the reasons why I decided to focus on development in downtown Pittsburgh is there was no one there. There was no community group, and no one really cared what I did. So I could really kind of make some things happen without that very difficult process because if you're in someone's community, and I don't it's very difficult. They you want to you what do you do? They don't necessarily understand what it takes to make a project happen, to make a project whole. There's things they want that they may never be able to get because it's just not affordable. That's a really difficult conversation to have.
Hey, everybody, this is Neil. We are going to get back to this great conversation in just one second. But I think it's fair to say that right now we are facing some pretty unprecedented challenges in the 21st century. I mean, you name it, environmentally, socially, economically, we've got some big problems that we need to overcome. And that's why, for me personally, and the people that work with us at Latitude, we want to dedicate our time and our energy so that we are not only working to put food on the table and a roof over our heads, but also make the world a better place. And so, if you are at all interested in combining your sustainability values with a very powerful financial model of real estate, then I highly encourage you to check out what we are doing at Latitude. We are creating something truly special with a tribe of change agents that for now is working across North America. And hopefully, one day in the future, with you coming on board, we can be working across the globe. So please check us out. You can go to www.chooselatitude.com, or you can find us on social media at latitude.realty on Instagram, and we are also on Facebook. Okay, let's get back into it. From doing your own projects and having to like forge your own path there, when did the winds of change start turning for you? I
Oh,
crowd
when it changed for everyone else at the end of 2000. So, a couple of things happened. I had cobbled together this way I did projects, public private partnership, really pretty small scale. There was one project I did in East Liberty that took 12 sources of financing. It was crazy. It was a burnt out building. I bought it from the city. It was a 6-story building, significant, like 30,000 square feet, gorgeous Richardsonian building. But it had been vacant for 15, 20 years. It was a mess. It was really just the walls. The city sold it to me for $1,000. They put out an RFP to developers, and I spent a lot of time responding to it. And it turned out I was the only developer who responded. But I thought it was an amazing building, and I went about putting a development project together, getting the cost together. The bank would only lend 40% of the total construction costs, and so it took us it took 12 sources of financing to get it together. Everything from matching facade grants. The Urban Redevelopment Authority actually gave us 4 different deferred loans on the project, which we're still paying down, but the building's in much better shape now. We had a loan from LISC, which has been paid off, but it was a lot to pull it off, and that's what I got really good at. That financing, that capital stack was pretty creative. But then 2 things happened. One is that the Bush administration cut back on CBDG funds that flowed to cities, and those were the funds that the Urban Redevelopment Authority repurposed as facade grants and deferred loans, etc. And they ran out of funds. And I would start going to them with projects, and they'd say, "We have so many projects and no money. We have to figure out another." So that source of funding pretty well dried up for me. And at the same time, the banks became even more conservative and demanded more and more equity. And it just became impossible to do these projects. So that's really when things changed for me. And I kind of took a few years and stabilized my properties, which were all pretty funky. And I pretty purposefully thought, okay, I'm going to get them to the point where because I managed all of them. I had a little management company, and I pretty purposefully decided to close it down and make space for the next thing in my life, whatever that was. I figured I have a lot of skills. I'm not very good as a maintainer. I love starting new things, building new projects, and I couldn't imagine myself just managing property for the next 10 years. So I looked for a property manager and started to make room for the next thing. And in that period, someone I met started talking to me about the Jobs Act and how he thought it could apply to real estate. This was very early on, and I just was completely fascinated by it without really knowing what I was heading into. But for me, the regulation crowdfunding was not written then. This was regulation crowdfunding took years to write, 4.5 years. But for me, the idea that everyone could invest in a project in their neighborhood that would make a meaningful difference was just an unbelievably powerful one. I'm not a developer who has, high net worth equity investors in my back pockets. I'm a developer who always scrambled to put deals together that were really patient holds. They took a long time before they were worth anything. And it's hard to find equity for those sorts of projects. But the neighborhood I'd spent 20 years in, I could point to everyone who would want to participate. And the neighbors I had actually, for crowdfunding, would band together and buy buildings to keep them out of the hands of slumlords. So, there was that sort of community engagement, and I thought that would transfer really well to a platform crowdfunding for meaningful transformational real estate projects.
Well, let's catch not just the audience up, but me up. What I know of the Jobs Act, it was under the Obama administration, right? And it
That's
was
right, the
written from.
2012. So the Jobs Act of 2012, after quite a few people petitioned the administration, really sought to move crowdfunding for donations to crowdfunding for investment. That was really the big idea. And I think the primary way they sought to do it was using the internet and letting people advertise the sale of securities, investment opportunities on the internet. Until then, investment opportunities were all behind closed doors. And typically only accredited investors, who that's only about 3% of the population, could invest. So, a private placement memorandum would require you to find someone and tell them about the project and have them sign on. You couldn't put an ad up saying, if you're interested, come and talk to me. You had to talk to your attorney and your CPA and say, do you know anyone who'd like to invest $100,000? So even though 3% of the population is accredited, a much smaller percentage had even access to these real estate deals. They had to know someone, right, who's a real estate developer. And of course, the other 97% of the population are just not worth letting invest. So the Obama administration sought to change that through the Jobs Act. And they did that by taking two existing securities regulations and adding a third one. And they rolled out over 4.5 years, which is why the industry looks so confusing from the outside, because different platforms use different rules, which different regulations which have different rules around them. And so if you go to one platform, you mightn't be able to invest because it only permits accredited investors. You go to another one and you can invest, but only in a blind pool. They're all doing different things. So that was really what the Jobs Act started. So it's even now, a very nascent industry. It took the first two rules that rolled out were the existing ones that they changed. And so some early adopters like Fundrise and Realty Mogul and CrowdStreet built early platforms and have stayed with those original rules. And then in the middle of 2016, they released regulation crowdfunding, which was the third rule and is the one that is really the SEC's first attempt to democratize investment. And this rule is pretty burdensome. It basically says we want to protect investors, and we're going to let real estate, not real estate, but just platforms do that work. But in order to use this rule, they must become registered with the SEC, and they must be members of FINRA, the Financial Regulatory Agency, meaning they have to be audited and follow a lot of other rules. And then we'll let them use this rule, which lets anyone 18 and over invest. So these funding portals, as we're called, and there's 65 of them now, some of them are not active, some of them are very active, do the job of ensuring they're really gatekeepers, right? Gatekeepers to make sure that that the issuers who are raising money do everything they're supposed to do, and that their background checks run, and that the offerings are complete and they're registered and they do all their financial work, and they also make sure that investors are protected in a whole host of ways that come under the regulation. Everything from when someone opens an account, they must be provided with educational material explaining the rules. They always can ask for their money back up to 48 hours before an offering closes. There's just a whole host of things that are built into our platform. And so if you want to raise $200,000 for your project, you can come to Small Change, and we'll take you through this process. And you can list, as long as you're good and you do the right things, we'll register the offering for you with the SEC and list it for you online. And then you can market to investors, and anyone who's 18 and over can invest, which is an absolutely remarkable thing, I think.
Eve, were you wanting to create Small Change because you saw this as a way that you could go fund your own really interesting projects, or were you looking for the platform?
I'm not allowed to. So the rule does not permit us to have any interest in the projects on our site, which is disappointing. We're supposed to be neutral third-party service providers. We're not even allowed to invest in the offerings on our site. We're really providing a compliant tool for other people to raise money. I could go to a different funding portal and raise money, which I may do sometime, but I can't do it on my own site, not with that rule. I could do it with one of the other rules, but not with that one. So I think I was just, my experience in raising funds for, I don't even know how to start saying this. So my experience as a real estate developer was I was scoffed at by large developers, but I had a huge following for these little projects that I did that people recognized were important and added to their community. And so it was very hard finding capital. It was very hard finding capital as a woman. Um, and I think it would be so much harder if you were Black. Um, so I have this overly adjusted sense of fairness, and I really don't understand why someone who has $1,000 to invest shouldn't have the same opportunity as someone who's got $100,000 to invest. And I think that people really love their cities and neighborhoods and want to want to be part of making it better and should participate in the upside of making it better. So all of those things were going through my mind. Like if I had this tool when I was doing real estate development, it would have been the one I used because I love the idea of the democratizing of investment opportunity. And I would love to know that people invested who really cared, not just because they're really wealthy.
Before we get back into this episode, I want to do a quick interruption to highlight the work that makes this podcast possible. The heartbeat of regenerative real estate is the incredible people that are focused on redefining our culture's relationship to place. From Latitude's growing ecosystem of mission-aligned businesses and organizations to our community of real estate professionals that are best described as change agents, the work we are doing at Latitude is focused on transforming the built and natural environments so that people and planet can thrive together. Here's a short message from Latitude change agent Mark Voss out of Madison, Wisconsin.
Through our search, we look at conventional properties and we imagine together what they can become and how they can be, as they slowly evolve into a more regenerative property, what that does for their neighbors and for their neighborhood and for their community, as being an example of how a conventional property can become a productive property, to go from consumptive and extractive to productive.
The impact driven mission that you have, why small change and why that incremental development?
I'm absolutely horrified by the buildings that I see built in our country and what's permitted. Absolutely horrified. It doesn't cost more or less. It's just thoughtless. Okay, it's just you can take that money and build something fabulous that will contribute to the neighborhood, or you can build something that turns its back on the neighborhood. That's really what it's about. I mean, you know, we see thousands of platform buildings which are not very attractive because they're efficient and they make investors a lot of money. But I, I don't know how to say it any differently. I mean, I think that's the architect, urban designer, and city lover in me. I think there's a bar that every developer should be asked to reach. It's not just about zoning and meeting setback requirements. It's about many other things. Now, that bar could be very different. We've tried to be ambiguous about what change is. It could be a vacant lot that's been vacant for a long time in the middle of the city where the developer builds a passive house, but it's a luxury house. And in my mind, that's change, right? That developer is tackling a number of different things that are transformative. Or it could be someone who takes an ugly building in a neighborhood and converts it into a business incubator and isn't really thinking about sustainable green requirements, but they're providing job opportunities and training for people in a place that really need it. And that's changed too. Or it could be someone doing an affordable housing project. So I think we devised this change index survey that we use. That's the first step for a developer who comes to us, and the bar for us is 60%. If you can't score 60%, you're probably not a good fit for our platform. It's a very plain English index. Everyone should be able to understand it. Is the site walkable? Do you need a car to live there? Can you walk to a supermarket? Can you catch public transit? Is there a park nearby? Are you using, is it a minority owned business? Like there's a number of ways to get to that score. Are you using green features? Are you using even greener features like, natural building techniques? You get a score for all of that. So it really depends what you're focused on, how you get to that score. And it's actually been a really remarkable journey because first of all, it kept us honest. And then secondly, it's really branded us strongly. And it's a very rare developer who comes to us who doesn't fit that index anymore, which is fabulous. And there's lots of them. So there's no lack of people thinking like this.
Eve, do you have maybe like the highlight, maybe 3 projects that just really stand out to you that you're proud of hosting on your platform?
I'm proud of them all. Okay. I think I love the diversity most, and I'm very proud of the fact that at this point, 50% of our developers are minority or woman, which is extraordinary because, as you know, the real estate industry is really substantially male white, and that's very difficult for them. So I love that. I'm just really proud of that, especially because in Pittsburgh it's been so difficult making relationships with people who don't look like me because of the history of the city. So I think that's probably my proudest thing. Um, I love that they're also varied. I think we created this change index and gave people an opportunity to be insanely creative. And well, I can't talk about the terms of the open offerings. I can tell you about the 5 that are open now, and you'll see how wildly different they are. So one of them is a second-time developer that is tackling remaking the great estates of Massachusetts. These are historic estates with 15 and upwards bedrooms, hundreds of acres, astounding buildings, for the most part sitting vacant. And they have decided to remake them for the sharing economy. And they're renovating them, adding pools and patios to the grounds, vegetable gardens, and basically renting them out as for small events, private weddings, family get-togethers. I think they're on their 4th or 5th, and they're raising for the second one on our platform. And when they started, I'm not sure this is true anymore, they could not get a bank loan because the banks really saw this as rural project and they would not lend to it. And so crowdfunding has become a really big part of their strategy. And they love that the local librarian and the local senator all invest. That's pretty fabulous. A second one is a very difficult project in Baltimore, led by a Black woman. She is working on 2 blocks of historic townhouses, row houses in Baltimore. They're really quite beautiful buildings that are quite vacant. And I don't know if you're familiar with this type of project, but often there's city funds involved and opportunity zones and new market tracks, all of those things. So she has a complicated capital stack, and she is raising for that project in her communities. That's a pretty great project. It's very different than the luxury estate. We have a young woman in California, in San Francisco, who's taking a vacant warehouse and converting it into a community urban bathhouse, and raising money for that. We have in San Francisco also a nonprofit that is purchasing a a rental building that is largely occupied by BIPOC residents in the Tenderloin district, which is on the verge of gentrifying. And their goal is to convert that building to a cooperative for the people who live there. That's a very tough project, and that's pretty big change. And then we have a project in Phoenix. This is a developer who actually has a platform in Arizona and uses a different securities rule that only lets Arizona investors invest. And so they've done maybe 9 projects like that over the last few years using Arizona investors. We've been talking for a few years about helping them to expand nationally, and this is their first project with us. They're all that project is a short stay hotel, which is a little tired looking, and they're converting it into housing um, in an area that has like 0 vacancy. So they're all wildly different. They all have offering different returns. They're all raising different amounts, and all our past projects are just as different.
How does the crowdfunding show up on the capital stack? Is it as debt or as equity?
Well, it's up to them, but it's usually equity. But really, we don't dictate that. We have some debt offerings. I'm not allowed to say which. I'm not. Yeah, I'm very. There's only so much I can say about them, so I would encourage your listeners to go take a look. But we have 1 debt offering now and 4 equity, and we've had a couple of debts in the past. But it
Okay.
really depends. Like if you think about it, a nonprofit can't raise equity, so they really have to, because you can't make profit, right? So they really have to raise debt. So it varies, and the heart of the project, like an affordable housing project, how do you keep it affordable? You keep it affordable by keeping your financing costs down. That you can't expect them to return 25% internal rate of return. That's silly. So they're going to be really wildly different returns, and we see people really invest for different reasons. Clearly, some people are investing with their heart because they really care about an issue, and others are putting a portfolio together and they need and want to get a return.
And I would imagine it's a bit of a chicken and an egg scenario of you've got to get the projects and you've got to get the investors simultaneously. What have you found, that there's either more investors than there are projects, or more projects than there are investors? Like where do you see that balance right now?
Well, right now the balance is more well, it depends how you look at it. So crowdfunding isn't only about our investors. We've been working away building our account holder base, and we certainly have investors who've investing more and more and more in multiple projects. So the more account holders we have, the faster we'll help raise money. But it's very much about the developers crowd. We really believe that people will invest in the people that they know and the places they love.
Mm.
Um, Maybe not always, but maybe they want to invest in any affordable housing project. Okay, but they I think a site like ours is more likely to have people look at more than just the financial return. So it really matters what the developer does. Their crowd, they really shouldn't be crowdfunding unless they're willing to reach out to their crowd, unless they understand that. That's been really hard because developers don't always understand that, but that's changing. I think there's a new breed of person out there that gets that. And what we say to them is, look, we're going to help you with the whole process. It's very streamlined. We'll get this thing registered online, open the bank account, manage all the funds for you, everything. Once we're live, your job is just to market it. And that doesn't mean 1 email every 2 weeks. And marketing means different things for different people. Sometimes old-fashioned marketing is the easiest way to go. Like an email to a regular email can be extremely effective. We had one issuer who has incredible Facebook following. He did a little PR, and he arranged a meeting online with anyone on Facebook who wanted to meet with him. Max topped it at 20 people twice a week and filled his offering really fast because he has a really big following. And he
Wow.
just would meet with them and say, look, I'm doing this for you. You have an opportunity here. Here's the project. Here's what I'm doing. Here are my long-term plans. If you want to invest, here's how you do it. Whereas other developers have had more success with other. It just depends who your crowd is, really.
Yeah, what fascinates me is that we see more and more, at least out of our community, is that people, they might not be attracted to a PPM where you've got to come in with $100,000 minimum investment,
Oh,
but
there's
they want to
not people
invest
who
in
have
their
that.
backyard.
Yeah, there's not
Right.
people who have that.
They've got the 500,000 or $500 or $1,000 that they want to invest in an interesting project that's meaningful.
Or they've never invested in real estate and they're dabbling and trying it out. And they, we've seen people start with a little bit of money and invest more over time as they start to learn what it looks like. We're very careful to always present offerings in the same way so that people understand how we've got our pages organized and our disclosure packet. We try to encourage, we actually give developers all of the paperwork they need. We have almost a white label set of documents because the rule, if they provided us with a disclosure, we would have to have it reviewed by our attorney, and that's very expensive. So we did it backwards. We created a white label set of documents and used those. And that's not only easier for the developer, but it means that the investors see the same documents over and over and over again. And if there's something they're really looking for, they know exactly where to find it. So, yeah, I mean, if you've never invested before, it's scary, right? Um, People are attracted to investing in businesses that have weird widget names. I don't know why real estate is harder for them, but it has a structure to it that you have to learn over time. This capital stack idea, like if you're not a developer, you don't know what a capital stack is.
Where do you find that most developers that are interested in going the route of crowdfunding, like when is the right time? Is it after they've secured a property, or is it
Oh, well, they have to have control of the property. So we have some basic requirements. In order to list an offering on our site, you have to have some development experience or someone on your team who has development experience. Otherwise, it's going to be too hard. You have to know how to put a bank packet together, essentially. It's a pretty serious business. So that's an absolute requirement. You have to have control of the property. That might mean a sales agreement, but then we want to see that the sales agreement can be renewed or is long enough for the process. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to own the property. Um, and there are some other, we always ask for an address so we can check on Google to see the neighborhood it's in to make sure it's a real property. And then another red flag for us is I think people who don't take our intake form seriously. We have a first one, which is pretty simple. And if you can't tell us, what you're going to call your project and what you're building and who's involved, you're not ready. It's like you're not ready. So you've got to have, it's pretty clear when people submit these forms that here's what I'm going to do and here's what the waterfall's going to look like. It's like, okay, you guys know what you're doing. And then there's people in the middle who like, I'm not sure what I want to offer yet, but here's the project, here's what we're planning, that's okay too. But the people who say, I don't know how many units and I don't know when it's going to be built and I have no one on my team, they're the scary ones.
yeah, wow.
we
Well,
have we have to do background we have to do background searches for the SEC rules as well, but FINRA likes us to do them pretty late in the project because if someone's working on getting an offering live for 4 months, which is not impossible, it's depressing, but it's not impossible. It should only take a month. Um, something might happen in that 4-month period. So we tend to run those background reports pretty late to make sure they're not bad actors. So we'll generally also run a Google searches at the beginning to make sure we're not working with someone who's been indicted or perpetrated fraud or something really. I mean, it's pretty simple to do nowadays, just to make sure that we're serving investors well. Like, it's our reputation. We don't want things to go wrong for investors. We want
Sure.
things to go right.
Yeah. Well, Eve, I got to tell you, what excites me most about small change is just the potential that uh, people can either invest, or the potential of the different kinds of projects that
Yes, yeah.
you're going to help bring into being just by creating a
We need
platform.
investors. Investors are really what drive everything, and it's pretty hard to convert a Facebook follower to an investor. So when developers come and bring their crowd, and that crowd gets used to it, there's word of mouth. It's such a nascent industry that it's going to, I think, take a little while, but it
Yeah.
is very exciting. I think we're tackling three things. One is the projects and the change that they can make, and the second is the fact that people can grow wealth in their own community in a way they've never been permitted to before. I think that's amazing. And the third is the opportunity for minority and women developers, which um, I'm just thrilled that we're be- becoming an option for them.
Right. That is tremendous.
Yes.
Well, Eve, where can people go to actually invest or to sign up
Oh,
for
just go to
the project?
smallchange.co.
Smallchange.co. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
very
great.
simple.
And the last question that I have for you is, are you living in a loft above a coffee shop?
I am. Although the coffee shop went under. Well, no, the coffee shop, I actually have two side by side buildings in downtown, and the coffee shop is under the building next door. And we helped them limp through COVID-19. That was very scary. But they have survived. So, yes, I'm living above a coffee shop.
The dreams do come
The
true.
dreams, it took a long time, but there it is.
Well, Eva, what a fascinating story. Just the tenacity that it sounds like
Yeah.
you've embodied over the years to create something truly on the pioneering edge of finance and development. Uh, Absolutely inspiring.
Well,
So thank
thank
you.
you. At my end, it just feels like I've been picking away at it, like, you know, I am tenacious, but on the inside, it feels like movement is very, very slow. And then you look back and you see, oh, I created this thing, and I really hope it brings a lot more people, because that's what it's there for.
Okay, everyone, that is a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in to another great episode. If you're not already a subscriber, please do so wherever you get your podcast. You can create good karma by leaving a review on Apple Podcast or sharing this show with your friends. If you're looking for ways to get more involved in the regenerative real estate movement, then you are in luck. We have a Facebook community conveniently called Regenerative Real Estate that you can join and be a co-creator with us on this journey. If you have a business or organization that you feel is aligned with our mission to use real estate as the catalyst for a regenerative future and would like to work together, then please be sure to get in touch. We are building an ecosystem to help amplify your work and message, where you can present to our community or sponsor the work that we are doing. You can do this by reaching out to us at team@chooselatitude.com. Last, and certainly not least, this podcast is enabled by the people that buy and sell real estate with us through our network of Latitude regenerative change agents located across North America. Our goal is to help transform homes and habitats, person by person, property by property. And we do that by combining the skills of a real estate professional with sustainable and regenerative consultation. It is time that we all start to live our values, and we hope to work with you on your next real estate sale or purchase. Okay, that is all for now. In the words of Paul Hawkins, remember that we are either stealing our future or healing our future. We are hard at work trying to do the latter. So until next time, be well.